Welcome to the Amphibian Press podcast. I'm V.S. Holmes. With me today is Kristine Raymond, a cozy mystery and romance author. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, thanks for having me here. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, me too. It's always funny when you've been acquaintances on the periphery of social media, and then it's like, oh, now I have a voice or a face to go with this person. So
I know, and I always find that the connection is like we've been friends for years.
right.
I mean, that happens on my podcast all the time. It's like, okay, so I've seen your name, but then we start talking, and it's like, oh yeah, we have this in common and that in common, and oh, you do this too, and yeah,
Yeah.
it's fun.
It's one of the benefits of globalization, I think. One of
Absolutely.
the few benefits.
Yeah.
Um, So you're the author of the Finagled book, which is your new cozy mystery, as well
Yes.
as the Hidden Spring series. So I'd love to chat about both. Let's start with the most recent, and just give me a little bit of background for those of our listeners who haven't read it yet about Finagled and sort of the inspiration behind it as well.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, Finagled is my first cozy mystery. I hope the first of many in the Finn's Finds mystery series. And it is about Finn Bartusiak, who is a 33-year-old woman who is single, happily single, and she owns a basset hound and she owns an antique store, and she has this little life in the seaside town of fictional Portneuf, and everything's going along just great. And one day this man walks into her antique store and offers to sell her this priceless antique wooden box that she just is drooling over. And she kind of suspects that there's something a little fishy about the transaction, but she just can't not, buy this box from him. The deal is just too good.
Mm-hmm.
And as she's inspecting it after he leaves, a coded message literally falls to her feet. So she's intrigued by that. And not a minute later, in walks her high school crush, whom she hasn't seen in 15 years. And he walks in, out of the blue and asks her out on a date. So all of a sudden she goes from this nice, serene life with her antique store and her dog, and now she has all of this stuff happening to her. And it's just really a lot of fun. And Finn is, I don't even know how to describe her. She's a riot. She's kind of quirky. She has a lot of squirrel moments. She is extremely loyal to her family and her friends. And yeah, she gets involved in trying to figure out about this, what this message says and where it could lead. And at the same time, there's also a man who knows about the message. And that's pretty much where the real mystery comes in, is because now he's trying to get this box and the message back from her. And I won't go into too much more detail. I want people to read the book. But yes, that's basically Finagled.
That sounds like so much fun, and I always like the everything's perfect, and then here's this giant mess. Here are all these mysteries or these adventures that kind of get dumped in the character's lap, and I think it leads to sort of a little bit of that reluctant hero thing.
Yes.
And I always find that really fun because there's a lot of books out there where it's like someone seeking adventure, which and that happens, but I think it's a little bit more interesting to untangle, like, well, what would this character do when they have to deal with the situation and they don't necessarily want to, because you can get into their head a little bit more.
Right. Well, and Finn has her family that she deals with. Her mother's constantly trying to marry her off because her mother wants grandchildren. And so when Spencer shows up and asks her out, her mother just suddenly takes this really focused interest in her life. So she kind of has that to deal with too. And yeah, it was such a fun book to write. And it sort of came to me out of the blue. I had written romance or some variation of romance for almost 6 years. And I was looking for a change. I just kind of wanted to do something different. And I thought that I was going to write a thriller. Like that's kind of what was in my head. I'm like, okay, I'm going to write just something completely different. But as I was writing Finagled, it just took on a cozy aspect. And I'm like, okay, I'll go with it. I'll listen to what the muse is telling me. And I'm so happy with the result. And the readers seem to be happy with the result. I get really good feedback on the book.
Mm-hmm.
And there is still a little bit of romance in it because there's the developing relationship between Finn and Spencer.
And I mean that worked.
Oh yeah. And this is kind of an interesting side note is the character is named Spencer Dane. That's her love interest, is
Mm-hmm.
Spencer Dane. And I also host a podcast when I'm not writing.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I got an email, and the heading of the email was, "I am Spencer Dane."
Oh my
I'm like,
gosh.
okay, that's kind of weird. So I read the email, and there is a man out there who has the pen name of Spencer Dane. And in my book, Spencer Dane is actually a novelist.
Oh my
And
gosh.
there is a real life novelist, and he was on my show. So it worked out great. It
Did,
was
had he read your work, and did he know, or was it just like, he was
he
introducing himself?
well, he had Googled, I guess, his pen name,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like we all do.
Right, yeah.
Every once in a while, throw it up there. And my book popped up. And so he went to Amazon or Goodreads and read the synopsis and I guess read the look inside or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so he decided to contact me and yeah, introduce himself. And at first, because we get those messages that say, you kind of almost immediately think that he's sending a cease and desist, like, you can't
Right.
use this name or whatever, that kind of thing.
Right.
And it wasn't. He was so nice and so kind, and I invited him to be on the show. Yeah, he was a great guest, but he was thrilled. I ended up sending him a copy of Finagled, and he was thrilled to sort of be immortalized in my pages.
Mm-hmm. Now does he, here's the real question. Does he write the same type of genre as your character does?
Very similar. He writes, yeah, he kind of like thriller suspense sort of books, and that's along the lines of what my Spencer wrote. Now, the real Spencer Dane, he published like back in, I think, 2008, 2009, and 2011. So he hasn't written anything currently.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if you go to Amazon, you can find his books, and I just thought that was so neat, and he did too, thankfully. So
Yeah.
that was a relief.
That's always hard, because I know like some people get really attached to their either their pen name or their series name or their titles, and it's like, obviously most of those, I mean, series names you can copyright, but for the most part you can't really copyright names or titles.
Right.
And so it's like this weird gray area of like, how much overlap is there, and how attached are you? And I always think it's fun, but some people don't, and it is that initial like, oh no, like, am I about to get in trouble? Is this going to be a legal battle that I really don't want to deal with?
Well, exactly. And my only consoling thought at that moment was that only one book was out, so that if I had to change his name, it wouldn't be, quite that big a deal.
Right.
But like I said, it all worked out, and the real Spencer Dane is thrilled that there is a Spencer Dane in the Finn's Finds Mysteries. So
That's so much fun.
it is.
So, tell me a little bit about your Hidden Spring series, because that's sort of like your biggest endeavor so far.
Well, Hidden Springs, when I first started writing, which was completely on a whim, by the way, I did not have any intention of ever becoming an author. A friend of mine had self-published a couple of books and was telling me about the process, and I thought, you know what? I think I'm going to try to write a book. Why not? It's something I haven't done before. And so I sat down and wrote Here to Stay, which was the first in the series. And even at that time, I didn't necessarily plan on writing a series, but as I was introducing more secondary characters, I'm thinking,
Mhm.
okay, they need a story and they need a story, and more ideas came to me. So the
That's so
Hidden
much
Spring
fun.
series, it really is. And so the Hidden Spring series is 9 books set in starting in the 1860s Arizona territory. The novels actually span, I think it's 33 years. I think my math's right, because it starts in 1867, and Enduring Tradition takes place New Year's Eve of 1899.
Okay.
And each book is about a different member of this town, but they're all interconnected. They're either family or they're friends, and they can be read as standalones, but I personally like to start at the beginning of any series and just because you learn more, and you learn more of the backstory of everybody and the developing
Well,
kind of
especially
thing.
with romance too, because I feel like a lot of romance authors do write these series of standalones, and then the couple that started in the first book, you can see their relationship develop through the eyes of all these other characters. And so
Right.
when you jump in the middle, it's sort of like, oh, so like they have a kid. And I mean, it is fun to be like, okay, let's go back and see how they got together or whatever. But I don't know, I just love going in order too, because you can see all these little developments that happen over time.
Yeah, exactly. And like book 8, which is Coming Home, is actually about the daughter of the couple that's in Here to Stay, the first.
Oh, neat.
So yeah, there you do see that entire progression. But they're, again, they're historical Western romances. They are on the spicy side for anybody who thinks that, these might be sweet, clean romances. They're not. There's quite a bit of steamy action in them. But they are just so much fun to write, and they will always have my heart. Historical Western, the Old West is just where I would love to time travel if I could.
Mm-hmm.
I've just always been fascinated by the Old West.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just, yeah, I can't say enough about that series. And I've learned to never say never. At this moment, I am
Right.
through with that series. Although I said that after book 8, and then book 9 popped up a year and a half later. But as of right now, I don't see myself revisiting the Hidden Spring series. But you never know. You never
Right.
know what'll happen.
Well, I have this like funny relationship with like the Wild West historical romance, because I used to work in healthcare, and
Well,
when
that's the Wild West right there.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I read a lot of like paranormal romance, because I started out as like a sci-fi fantasy fan, and but I always do love like a good romantic subplot and some angst. And so working as a healthcare worker, there was this one resident that I took care of, and she had an entire closet, like a huge closet filled with like the old school like bodice ripper harlequin romance, and they were all Wild West.
Yep.
And I saw her reading one, and I was like, well, that looks like kind of fun. I like cowboys, and so I asked her, I'm like, would you mind if I borrowed one? And so over the like 2 years that I worked there, I read through her entire catalog. And it was just so much fun, and it was something that was sort of outside of my usual reading, and I just had so much fun with it. So as soon as I saw that you wrote like Wild West historical romance, I'm like, oh, this is exciting.
Yeah. Well, and Here to Stay, the first book in the series, is free everywhere. So
Okay, good.
that gives readers a chance to start the series without any big commitment. But you know, some of my favorite authors, Sandra Brown, Linda Howard, they started out writing historical westerns,
Mhm.
and then they moved into more of the romantic suspense. But yes, same as what you were saying about the lady with the bodice rippers. That's kind of, I have those books on my shelves. It's like,
Mhm.
yeah, there's just something about them that just, I don't know,
Well, I think in
makes me enthusiastic.
well, in a lot of ways, I think the Wild West, like obviously there's this sort of like classic cowboy stereotype of the Wild West, but there's a lot, because romance is such a empowering and feminist genre, even though a lot of people don't view it that way. I think there's parts of that aspect in the Wild West, because there are all these people who are going out there to find freedom, to find something that they couldn't find in the East, as far as like the colonizers go. And so I think it really works with that as a subgenre, because there's this empowering like adventure aspect to it, that's also, we see that in a lot of parts of the genre.
One of the things that really appeals to me about the Old West, and this is going to sound just kind of off the wall a little bit, but was that just that lawlessness, just that wild, you had to take care of yourself, you had to look after your own and defend. And these families were formed not necessarily like nuclear families, but just from friends and neighbors coming together, because they all had this common goal to, keep their town protected and and survive the elements, and everybody had to work together. And now we live in a society where in some cases you don't even know your neighbors' names. I mean,
Right.
you could pass them on the street and not even realize that they live next door to you.
Hmm. Yeah.
And there's just something about just the whole community. And yeah, you can kind of place that in any setting, I think. But again, for me, because the Old West holds such an appeal for me, it was just, it was the most natural thing for me to write my books in that setting.
Yeah. When I think too, like in some ways it's sort of like analogous to the internet, because there were all these people from all these different backgrounds, because despite what a lot of the Western classic films would have us believe, there was a huge amount of diversity there, because there were these people who were fleeing from stuff that was going on in the East, and because of that lawlessness they had this freedom to exist sort of how they wanted to. So these communities were built up of people who were like-minded but not necessarily from similar backgrounds, and
Right.
that sort of found family thing that happens in a lot of those small towns, like the one that you've created. And then it's a little bit reflective of what's happening on the internet, sort of going back to like how we found each other and stuff like that.
Right. Right, because you connect with people who have the same ideals that you do, or the same interests, or
Hmm.
whatever it is, regardless of where they live, or what their social stature is, or economic, or anything else.
Hmm.
I think you're drawn more to people who do have those same beliefs more so than anything else.
Right, yeah, exactly. So sort of off of that, you have in the last book in the series, you have a Yavapai character as the female love interest.
Yes.
What kind of research? Because my day job is as an archaeologist, so I work closely with a lot of Native people, and I just think that that's so neat that you incorporated that into this series. But what sort of research did you do, and like what was like one of the most interesting things that you learned doing that research?
I Googled a lot of articles. I read a lot of articles. The research for historical romance of any genre, whether it's Regency or Western or anything. I mean, there is a lot of research involved, but it's so interesting to me. I mean,
Mhm.
I love doing it, and you kind of fall into that rabbit hole, but in a good way, because you Google something, you read an article, and then there's a footnote to another article, and then you're
Mhm.
reading it, and you keep going on. But um, I lived in Arizona for a couple of years, so I was kind of familiar a little bit with the Native Americans that lived in that still live in the area.
Mhm.
There's a couple of reservations out there, and so I just thought it was really interesting, based on, because Hidden Springs is loosely based in the Camp Verde area.
Okay.
So I looked to see what Indian tribes were in that area at the time, and Yavapai was one of them. And I think the most interesting thing that I learned was, it was very similar to the Trail of Tears,
Mhm.
that the government moved the Yavapai people to a reservation down near Phoenix. And I talk about that in the story. I mean, that's
Mhm.
kind of the background of the character in the story, is that when she was a small child, she and her family had to make this trek from their reservation to the new reservation in Phoenix, and how many Native Americans died along the way. And it really brought it back to me. You learn about it in history class when you're in school, but to read these things, and to really put yourself in their place, and to think about what they went through, and the injustice of it.
Mhm.
I mean, it almost made me cry when
Yeah.
I was reading about it, to put in my book. And I really hope that, while my story is a romance, I hope that it also reflects the the solemnness
Mhm.
of what the Native Americans went through during that time.
Mhm. Well, and I love that. in, at least in the blurb for the book, you mentioned this sort of collision of these different cultures, and there's so much nuance to those sorts of situations, but also how you have her trying to marry this, no pun intended, trying to marry this traditional, healing, with more modern medicine, and then how she's trying to deal with that, and then also the love interest is trying to deal with that, and like that's still a conversation we have today about, like, traditional medicines versus pharmaceuticals. And it's always fascinating to me how these things, like, yeah, they change over time, but also we're still having that conversation.
Right. Well, and I'm a big believer in traditional medicines
Hmm.
and homeopathic and herbal. So for me to have that be a part of her character, again, that was almost like me embracing it. It's like, yes, this is what I want her to be. On the same side, though, I also do believe that there is a place for, modern medicine.
Hmm.
I mean, and I really do believe that the two can coexist.
Right.
And that was what uh, the whole story, again, Enduring Traditions wasn't supposed to be written. I really thought that I had ended the series after book 8. It was called Coming Home. As I said, it was about Elizabeth, is Sam and Kate's daughter from the first book, and it felt like it was finishing the series up. And all of a sudden, and it was while I was in the middle of, I think it was when I was starting to write Finagled, Micah, who is the doctor in
Hmm.
um, Enduring Traditions, he was kind of a side character in some of the other books. He's the son of one of the main characters. And he just kind of started like tapping on my brain, like, okay, I want a story about me. And so in looking at the timeline and starting to pull it all together, I thought, how cool would it be to do it at the turn of the century when all of these modern practices were coming into play, and he is a doctor.
Hmm.
And it just was like, okay, so how can I really do a counterpoint for that? And yeah, that's kind of how it came about. And I I don't know. I really do. I don't know. I really do find it interesting how people blend together such conflicting beliefs and how they
Right.
make it work.
Hmm.
Because the book wasn't just about the medicine; it was about how they, is their love strong enough to overcome their beliefs
Hmm.
and see that there's value in what each has to offer.
Right. Well, and, it's our modern day medicine, draws so much from traditional and various, like natural remedies, so to
Oh
speak.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think going back and sort of dissecting how a lot of those relationships between the two practices started, it's so much a metaphor for how communities can blend these different things and learn how to, navigate those waters in a way that's, understanding and respectful, as opposed to just sort of pushing back. And that's a story that we still need, sadly, that we still need it. But it's good that we have stories like that we can look at and sort of learn from.
I think it's important to understand that just because someone has different beliefs, it doesn't mean that you can't value them. Just
Mhm.
because they aren't your own beliefs doesn't mean they don't have any value,
Right.
that they aren't something that maybe you can incorporate in your own life.
Hmm.
I think nowadays people just kind of think that, okay, if you don't believe like I do, then you're wrong and I'm right. But you can you can accept somebody else and not necessarily have to change what you believe in.
Right.
It's okay to still be friends with someone who thinks something different, or engages in a different medical practice, or whatever it is. We don't all have to think the same thing or
Mhm.
believe in the same thing to coexist.
Yeah. And I mean, that's something that I've encountered in, I mean, I think we all encounter it in our own life, to some extent. but that's something that I've encountered with my husband when we first met. We had not, I wouldn't say opposing like political views, but definitely very different political views. And at one point, I just sort of was listening to him, and he was listening to me. But at one point, I remember saying, like, I think we do want very much the same thing. And he's like, really? Like, or have you been hearing the same conversations that I have? And I'm like, no, I mean, we want the same thing, but the roads that we think we should take to get to that point are very different. And that's, I think that's what matters. Is like, do you want the same thing? Yes. Okay, but how do you get there? It doesn't necessarily matter as much. Which roads you take, as long as you're ending up in the same place and everyone's cool with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, obviously, you've said that there's this romantic theme throughout your series, and then also in your mysteries. But is there another theme that you've sort of incorporated, like this sense of community throughout all of your work?
I think it's more, yeah, actually, that might be a good definition, come to think of it. Well, in all of my books, there's a closeness between the characters that isn't necessarily through blood relation.
Hmm.
Like, and I mean, growing up, I had an aunt who I didn't find out until I was probably, maybe 10 or 11, that she wasn't a blood relative, but it didn't matter. She was our aunt,
Hmm.
she, and I think that's kind of in all of my books. You have these friendships where people kind of like, you get to choose your family.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't in real life, you're born into your family, but with your friends, you get to choose who you want to be part of your world.
Hmm.
And that's a pretty common theme in all of my books,
Hmm.
is that you have this loyalty to these people. And again, regardless of the differences between you, you can still have a loving relationship.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's so important. Like, I grew up as an only child, and my parents were a little bit older. We lived in a pretty like rural, isolated area. And so having that found family, my parents, good friends, my godparents, people who weren't necessarily blood related to me, but were so much like, I so much consider those people family still. And
Yeah.
now as I'm getting older, and I'm thinking about maybe starting my own family, and a lot of my friends have already had children, it's like I'm auntie to so many kids who I'm like, I have no relation to, but I'm still auntie. And that's been so wonderful for me, because I grew up in this sort of more isolated community, and now I'm seeing like how much that close knit friendship matters as an adult. And like you said, like, we don't necessarily know who our neighbors are, but we still need that sense of community, whether we're finding it online or we're finding it through our friends, or we are able to find it through blood relation.
I think it's really important, especially as you get older, to really build your tribe. When you're younger, when you're in high school and all, you kind of think that, oh, I have so many friends and all of this. But as you get older, those people who you considered friends maybe fall more, now they're more like as
Hmm.
acquaintances, or they move and you lose touch and all, but you end up having like your core tribe, and those are your people. And regardless of whether it's your sister, your brother, your parents, cousins, or your friends, it's just really, I don't know, I think it's really important. And that's, I think, the general theme in all of my books is, so far there really haven't been any
Right.
loners
Hmm.
yet.
Or
Who
maybe they
knows?
start
Who
out that
knows
way,
what'll
right?
come next?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I think that's like, especially as people get more and more divided, and things are more complicated in a lot of ways. That's what I've been sort of pushing forward with, is this sense of put good out there, put community out there, put this connection out there and just sort of love the world through it kind of thing, even if it's really more difficult
Yeah.
sometimes. But I think that's really what's going to get us through these, complicated times.
I look around today and sometimes it really makes me sad to see how and again the media really
Right.
plays this up. They seem to show all the negative, oh, this person reacted to this situation in this way, and this person called 911 on these kids that had a lemonade stand and they
Oh yeah.
didn't have a permit, and all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. But there's also so much good, so many people that reach out to other people regardless of their race or their gender or their age or any of that, religion, it doesn't matter, because we're just reaching out to another
Hmm.
human being. And that's what I really think we all need to do. We all have our idiosyncrasies. We all have our things that kind of tweak
Hmm.
other people, and no one's going to like everybody, and everybody's not going to like us, and that's just a fact. But that doesn't mean that you can't be kind to other people just because they're human
Hmm.
and you're human. So just
Yeah.
be kind. I mean, honestly, the golden rule: treat others how you'd want to
Hmm.
be treated. When 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 you act some way towards somebody, ask yourself, how would you feel if they treated you
Right.
that way?
Yeah, that's something that, like, I mean, I've always sort of had that in the back of my mind to some extent, but it really was driven home. My dad was always like a wicked loner, like his like quintessential cowboy type of guy. And like myself, introverted, always said he didn't have a lot of friends or a lot of community. And he recently passed away, and just been overwhelmed by all of these people who have come forward, who it's like, oh yeah, I knew Dave. Oh yeah, like I used to work with him on this thing, and just all of these people who have come forward. And it's like this huge community that it's sort of sad that he didn't maybe realize that he had, but now that we're
Right.
realizing that he hadn't. It's like all of these people who you don't realize that you impact, or that might have a passing relationship with, but when it comes down to it, they're coming forward and just helping out. And it's been so powerful to see that. And it's like it really cemented for me the importance of just doing little things to help out whenever you can, and just trying to have that community.
You never really know when you do something how much of an impact it's going to have on somebody else.
Hmm. Exactly. So what, sort of switching gears here, we got super deep.
Yeah, I know.
That's the point. Yeah. And well,
That's
that's why
okay.
I always say, like, feel free to go on tangents, because that's where the meat of the stuff is. Um, but tell us a little bit about what's next for you, because you just sort of embarked on this new series with Finagled. So yeah, what's coming up for you?
Well, I'm currently working on the second book in the series called Finicky Eaters, and it is a little slow coming along, developing, but that's okay because aside from writing, I'm also really busy with my podcast. I host a podcast called Wordplay with
Mhm.
Kristine Raymond, and I chat with authors kind of the same way we are, just a really casual conversation. And I chat with two authors a week. So that keeps me
Mhm.
really busy. And I'm in the process of working on a super secret project with author Dawn Hosmer, and that should be coming to light in the next couple of weeks. So that's been keeping me
That's
busy.
fun.
So yeah, it is. But yeah, I, as much as my time is sort of has been
Mhm.
splintered lately, I don't anticipate that I will stop writing. The books may just be a little
Mhm.
slower coming out, but I've got actually several ideas for the Finns Finds mystery. I have several titles already worked out, like An Affinity for Murder and Coffin
I
Conundrum,
I love,
just to name
like,
a few.
I feel like romance writers have just nailed this, but I just love the punny titles. Like,
Yeah.
and just the utter shamelessness of how fun the titles are. It's like that's something that I feel like the romance genre has just done so well at, is just leaning in to the tropes,
Yeah.
to the fun titles, to the like really entertaining situations, the angst that comes with falling in love or falling out of love or whatever's happening, you know. It's just so much fun, and I think a lot of other genres could learn from that.
Well, and it's taking
Mhm.
chances, especially if you're an
Yes.
indie author. Because if you are an indie author, there are no
Mhm.
rules. There really aren't. You can do whatever you want, and you can create your own genre. I mean, why not? You know, all of these genres and these tropes and all of this started
Mhm.
somewhere. So, you know, have fun with it. And if it comes to you and it feels right, just write
Mhm.
it. Just do it. Just get it out there. And yeah, I mean, I must have honestly like 20 titles that all incorporate the
Mhm.
word Finn. It was so much fun. And that's one of the things I like about being an indie is I get to choose my own titles because to me they are as much a part of the story
Right.
as the
Well, and they're
story.
memorable too, which I think, you know, is really helpful because, you know, there's a huge market of books out there. And like I wouldn't say it's saturated because you know, readers will always read. But
Right.
it
Right.
is helpful when you have you know, a catchy title or a catchy tagline, because it, you know, it's like an earworm, and readers
Yeah.
will remember that, even if they might not remember necessarily what the book was about when they first downloaded it or, you know, discovered it or whatever. They'll remember the title. And I think having the freedom to choose that is so important.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what's going on with me. You know, I'm hoping to have Finicky Eaters out. Oh, I hate putting a date out there because I always end up missing it, but I'll go broad and say
Okay,
this year.
that's good. That's good. Yeah. I try
Yeah.
and choose a season, and then it's like, okay, I'll just change this from fall of 2020 to fall of 2021, and we're fine. People can just be like,
Right,
oh, I
right.
must have misremembered.
And then I do have some other book ideas too that are floating around up there. I actually have another historical western that is unrelated to Hidden Spring series, so that might
Oh,
end
cool.
up, you know, coming out sometime soon. And I have a series, a contemporary romance series to go back to
Mhm.
that genre that will be either, I haven't really decided yet, either like five, anywhere from 5 to 8
Oh,
books, and those are about a group of sisters. So yeah, I still have, I mean, I have a notebook full of
mhm.
story ideas, so eventually they'll all
Yeah.
come out, I
That's
hope.
like that's one thing. I remember once I had this fear of like, what if I run out of ideas? And then, you know, like 2 seconds later, it's
I
like, oh, come on.
know.
You know that's not gonna happen. You're gonna run
Yeah.
out of time, not
Oh yeah.
ideas.
Exactly. And then when you think you have everything planned, then there's that one book that you didn't have room for anything else. Then all of a sudden you wake up with like,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, I just thought of the best character and the best storyline, and now I have to write
Well,
that
I
book.
had that happen recently. Like we all have that, like that sort of joking thing where it's like, oh, this idea came to me, and then you know, in the middle of the night, and I wrote it down, and then in the morning, it's like unintelligible. Um, so
Yeah.
that happened recently, and then in the morning, I looked at it and like, actually, though, that's that's not half bad. And then I'm like, oh no, you're supposed to be finishing your series. You're not, you know, focus, focus, focus.
I had a dream the other night that I had a published book out there, and I'm not gonna release or say the title because I may end up writing the book, but I had this published book out there and people were just loving it and buying it right and left. And I was like, wow. When I woke up, I was like, wow, you know, if only people bought my books that are actually out there as much as they were buying this fictional one that I haven't even written.
If only, well, maybe you'll write it,
If only.
and then
I
they'll
know.
come find you.
Unfortunately, all I remember is the title. I don't even remember what it was about. But while I was dreaming it, it
That's,
was really
you know,
good.
that's what's important.
Yeah.
So where can people find you? Whether online, or you doing any events coming up?
I'm not going out to any events this year. not as of right now. But the best way to find me is to visit my website, which is www.kristinerraymond.com, and that's Kristine with a K, so KristineRaymond. And from there, you can find links to all of my books. You can find links to the podcast. The super secret project will be up there soon. Pretty much everything you want to know about me can be found on my website. If you'd like to just listen to episodes of the podcast, you can go to www.wordplaypodcast.com. I am also on social media. I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and BookBub, and I don't know, I think a couple of others. So I have a Pinterest page, but honestly, mostly I just am on Facebook, to be honest. That's where most of my interaction takes place.
We all have our pet social media, right?
Yeah, I've tried some of the other ones, and I really am bad about Twitter. I just cannot get into Twitter, and honestly, it just takes so much time to keep it up. It's like, how do you find the time for everything between writing and marketing and social media and doing the laundry and grocery shopping and paying bills?
I think the best thing that I ever learned was, consistency matters more than having yourself spread over like 2,000 things. And once I learned that, I'm like, well, that makes me feel so much better.
Of course, being the introvert that I am, which I know is laughable because I do a podcast, but honestly, I don't interact a lot on social media. Like even on Facebook, I'll post a couple things, I'll share some friends' posts, and then it's like, okay, I'm done for the day. I mean, my poor members of my readers group, because I have one, and I think I'm lucky if I post in there like 4 times a year.
Yeah, it's like,
I'm just horrible about it.
It's hard too, because you're supposed to like promote yourself, but then it's you really just want to share stuff that other people are doing, but then you don't want to let yourself fall by the wayside. It's finding that dynamic, and it's also different across platforms, right?
Yeah.
So
it is.
But I'll put links to all of that down below, and people can find you that way.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, this has just been so much fun. I always love connecting with people, and it's amazing the conversations that I've been able to have through podcasting. It's just such a wonderful platform.
It is the best. I have people ask me, well, who's your favorite guest? And it's like, you know what? All of them. All of them, honestly. And that's not an exaggeration. It's like, I learn something different. I just get something out of every single conversation. It's wonderful.
Yeah, for sure.
And I don't have to be in like a large, group of people.
Yeah.
I get to still be in my pajamas.
Yeah. Well, especially, I loved how you said, you're like, oh, I don't have to clean my office because it's audio only. I'm like, there's a reason why I switched from video to audio only.
Yeah.
My house is a disaster. Like I'm in the middle of spring cleaning. We don't need that. No one needs to see it. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'm definitely looking forward to checking out your series.
Oh, well, thank you. And thanks so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. This has been the Amphibian Press podcast. I am V.S. Holmes, and with me today was Kristine Raymond. Thank you so much for listening.